Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. Today from DC Direct, we are featuring Batman and Son Batman. Okay, so this is a much older action figure that came out well over 20 years ago. This was when DC Collectibles was known as DC Direct. One of my local collectible toy shops got this in stock, and I had to pull the trigger on it. For me, this version of Batman in this costume is probably one of my favorite versions of the character. It's definitely in my top 3. This look really embodies early 2000s Batman. You know, it's very similar to the Batman that we saw in the Hush storyline. But in this case here, this is Batman as he appeared in the Grant Morrison story, Batman and Son. Wonderful looking artwork here by, I think, maybe Andy Kubert, if I remember correctly. On the back, here's some other figures from the Batman and Son line. We have the Tim Drake Robin. We have Damian Wayne. We have the Ninja Man-Bat. We have a very cool version of the Joker. And then we have Batman right here. Nice small little bios on each character, which I really appreciate. This action figure was sculpted by Jonathan Matthews. It's awesome that DC Direct credited the sculptor. The weird thing with collecting these older DC Direct figures is that you can never really place a date on these because they never print the year these figures were produced. You know, all I remember is that these came out in the early 2000s, and that's mostly because DC Direct was what the company was known as at the time. You know, there was a certain period in time, maybe closer to the 2010s, when the name shifted to DC Collectibles. But yeah, this is a DC Direct figure. And like I mentioned, this is based off of the comic book Batman and Son, penned by Grant Morrison and illustrated by Andy Kubert. Great story. It's kind of the introduction to Damian Wayne, and the story is wild. Damian's kind of like unhinged when he lives with his dad for the first time. You know, he's trying to do everything to like win his father's approval, but he goes to the extremes. Like, for example, you know, he chops off a guy's head and keeps it in a bag. So I mean, for someone that was raised by the League of Assassins, you know, that kind of explains a lot. But yeah, great figure. Again, I'm very fond of this era, and let's take him out. It pains me to do this, but I want this figure loose more so than on card. Alright, so a word of caution on these older DC Direct figures is that, you know, they don't always age well in the sense of the materials used. Like for a lot of the older action figures in general, whether produced by DC Direct or Toy Biz, whatever rubbery material they use to produce these capes, you know, over time, for whatever reason, and it could be very random, these capes could like begin to deteriorate and degrade. You know, I have many Toy Biz figures where capes of this material, they just start melting and they'll stick onto the figure. It's impossible to clean. Thankfully, in this case, the cape is not tacky. It feels perfectly fine. Included with the action figure is a display base. And this display base we've seen before. This was included with the DC Direct Batman Hush line of action figures. This was the updated Batman logo when the Hush comic book debuted way back. I think it was like 2002, 2003. And then here are the pegs for the foot mounts, and you can pretty much place them anywhere here, you know, to just, you know, where the figure is positioned on the stand. Very, very cool. I kind of wish we'd get stuff like this nowadays. You know, the stands we get nowadays are just very generic. Alright, so we have Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, as he appears in the comic book Batman and Son, written by author Grant Morrison and illustrated by Andy Kubert of the famous Kubert family. Great action figure. Again, this is probably one of my favorite versions of Batman. A word of caution, again, on handling these older DC Direct figures. If the joints feel stiff and tight, do not force them. A lot of these older DC Direct figures, they're prone to breakage, especially at the joints. The pins were very brittle, as are some of the shoulders. So just, don't go too nuts with it. If it feels like it's not going to move, don't force it. Because the last thing you want to do is break these action figures. Also, these figures, just because of the way, just by nature, they're more like miniature statues that feature articulation, so they're not the most posable of action figures. And this guy does not want to focus correctly. There we go. Great looking version of Batman. I do love this shade of blue against the gray. I know some people are a little bit more partial to the black cowl and cape against the gray, but in this case, it works phenomenally well. Much smaller action figure also. This is within the 6-inch scale, so you're looking at something that'll, stand close to like a Marvel Legends as opposed to like a McFarlane DC Multiverse figure. For example, here's the McFarlane Batman from the DC Multiverse line. You can see how much taller it is. But if you happen to collect the older Mattel DC Classics figures, this figure should feel just at home with that smaller scale, as with the Marvel Legends. The articulation, I might not get too crazy. The head does swivel, but it feels stuck. Oh wait, there you go. Got it loose. Looks up and down. The arms only go up and down. They do not go outward. The elbows do bend, but I'm not going to force it. It kind of feels like if I move it, I don't want to say it's going to break, but I don't want to chance it. There is no waist articulation. The legs are articulated, as are the knees. So even though this figure is articulated, it's kind of pointless because you can't get it in any in any pose outside of its neutral pose. Because the minute you move the leg up and bend the knee, it's not going to stand unless it's on the base. And then you can't really get them in like running poses or anything. Like I said, it seems like the articulation was much more of an afterthought with these older figures. Essentially, they're just miniature statues that have articulation. But for me, the presentation is just beautiful. Even though it lacks the bells and whistles of a modern figure, I kind of feel this is a little bit more artsy. The cape's much more dynamically posed. The overall presentation looks beautiful. There's subtle folds and wrinkles in his costume. Great looking utility belt. A very cleanly printed Batman emblem on his chest. And for me, it's just a fantastic piece. This is something that I really wanted in my collection. Anytime I could find, something that looks like a perfect Batman figure, I always have to just grab it. And this one is no exception. Now that I'm handling it, I'm kind of wondering if parts of this figure what is making reuse of the original Hush Batman figure that came out some years prior to this one. Alright, so if this is something that you come across at a flea market or at a collectible toy store or comic book shop, give it a look. It might pique your interest and it might be something you want to bring home. For me, it's like I said, I had to pull the trigger on this. It's just a gorgeous piece. Alright, so with that being said, let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. Alright, later.